March 3, 1956, 9:18 p.m. Salvatore Vitale made the biggest mistake of his life. He sat down at Bumpy Johnson's table without being invited, took food off Bumpy's plate like they were friends, laughed about how Harlem money needed supervision from people who knew what they were doing, said Brooklyn numbers were more organized. Then he waited for Bumpy to respond. Bumpy didn't. He set his fork down slowly, looked at Vitale, looked around the room, and said absolutely nothing. The silence lasted 10 seconds. In a room full of Harlem's most powerful people, numbers bankers, city council aides, jazz club owners, even an off-duty NYPD detective, nobody moved, nobody spoke. They just watched. Because everyone in that room knew something Sal Vitale didn't. In Harlem, silence from Bumpy Johnson wasn't hesitation. It was a death sentence. What happened in the next 48 hours didn't just end Sal Vitale's career. It sent a message to the 5 families that would echo through New York's underworld for the next decade. To understand what happened that night at Wells Supper Club, you need to understand who Bumpy Johnson was in 1956. He wasn't just another Harlem gangster running numbers and shaking down corner stores. Bumpy was the man who stood between his community and the wolves trying to devour it. By the mid-50s, the Italian mob had their eyes on Harlem. Specifically, they wanted the numbers racket. Poor folks betting nickels and dimes that added up to millions every week. And the 5 families, Luciano, Costello, Gambino, all of them, wanted every penny. But there was a problem. His name was Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy had built something the Italians couldn't understand. He didn't rule Harlem through fear alone. He ruled through respect. When families couldn't make rent, Bumpy paid it. When cops harassed black businesses, Bumpy made calls that made it stop. When Italian enforcers tried muscling local operators, Bumpy sent them back to Brooklyn in ambulances. The 5 families had tried everything. They'd sent muscle. Bumpy broke them. They'd tried bribes. Bumpy told them Harlem wasn't for sale. They'd tried working around him through politicians. Bumpy had better connections. By 1956, they were desperate, and desperate men make dangerous moves. That's where Salvatore Vitale comes in. Sal was a mid-level captain in the Luciano Costello faction out of Brooklyn. Not a boss, not even close, but ambitious. The kind of guy who thought being loud meant being powerful. The kind who'd spent his whole life in Italian neighborhoods where people jumped when he walked in a room. Sal had never been to Harlem. Not really. He'd collected a few payments from mixed operations on the border, shaken down a couple of independent bookies. That was it. He thought he understood how things worked. He didn't. In early 1956, Costello's people wanted to test something. They wanted to see if Bumpy's reputation was real or just Harlem mythology. They wanted to know if a made man from Brooklyn could sit at a table in Harlem and command the same respect he got in Bensonhurst. So they sent Sal Vitale uptown. The mission was simple: make contact with Bumpy Johnson. Open a conversation about cooperation. Feel out whether Bumpy was willing to let Brooklyn operators run numbers in East Harlem in exchange for a cut. Sal thought this was his big break, a chance to prove himself, show the bosses he could handle delicate situations. He had no idea he was being used as a test dummy. March 3, 1956. Saturday night, Wells Supper Club on Lenox Avenue and 131st Street was packed. It always was on Saturday nights. Politicians, numbers bankers, musicians, hustlers, everyone who mattered in Harlem came through Wells at some point, and Bumpy Johnson had a table there. Same table every Saturday. Corner spot with a clear view of the door. Back to the wall. Strategic. At 9:15 p.m., Sal Vitale walked in. He was dressed like he was going to a wedding. Expensive suit, gold watch, hair slicked back. He wanted to look important, powerful, like someone Bumpy should take seriously. He spotted Bumpy immediately. Hard not to. Bumpy wasn't flashy, but everyone in the room was aware of him. He was sitting with 2 Harlem numbers bankers discussing territory adjustments for the spring. Quiet conversation, business. Sal walked over. Didn't wait to be acknowledged. Didn't ask permission. Just pulled out a chair and sat down. First mistake. "Bumpy Johnson," Sal said, grinning like they were old friends. "I've been wanting to meet you." Bumpy glanced at him, said nothing, went back to his conversation. Sal wasn't used to being ignored. So he reached over, and this is where it got bad. He reached over and took a piece of cornbread off Bumpy's plate. Second mistake. "Good food up here," Sal said, chewing. "You know, we've been hearing a lot about Harlem business. My people think maybe it's time we talk about working together. You handle your thing, we handle ours. Everybody makes money." The two numbers bankers at the table went completely still. Bumpy still said nothing. Sal kept talking. Because that's what nervous men do. They fill silence. "See, the thing is, Harlem's great and all, but it needs structure, organization, the kind of thing Brooklyn's been doing for years. Numbers, policy, everything runs smooth because we got systems in place. Maybe Harlem could use some of that expertise. You know what I'm saying?" He laughed. Nobody else did. Bumpy set his fork down, slowly. He looked at Sal Vitale. Not angry, not offended, just looked at him. Then he looked around the room, at the numbers bankers, at the city council aide 2 tables over, at the jazz club owner by the bar, at the off-duty cop eating catfish in the corner. Everyone was watching now. And Bumpy said nothing. 10 seconds of silence. Count to 10 right now. Feel how long it actually is. Now imagine that silence in a crowded restaurant where everyone is staring at you. Sal's grin faded. His hand, the one still holding that piece of cornbread, started shaking. Finally, Bumpy spoke. 5 words. "You finished eating?" That was it. No threats, no yelling, no explanation. Just, "You finished eating?" Sal didn't know how to respond. He set the cornbread down, stammered something about just trying to talk business. Bumpy didn't respond. He picked up his fork and went back to his meal like Sal wasn't even there. Sal sat there for another 30 seconds, frozen. Then he stood up, mumbled something about catching up later, and walked out. The whole room watched him leave. And the moment he was gone, the restaurant went back to normal. Conversations resumed. The jazz band started playing again. Like nothing had happened. Except everything had happened. Within 48 hours, the consequences started rolling in. Monday morning, Sal's runners, the guys collecting bets uptown, stopped getting paid. Not by Bumpy's people, by their own contacts. Nobody wanted to touch Brooklyn money that had been connected to the Wells incident. Monday afternoon, 3 Harlem numbers bankers who'd been doing border business with Brooklyn operations called their Italian contacts and said the same thing. "We're out. Find somebody else." Monday night, a sit-down that had been scheduled for weeks between Costello's people and a Harlem policy operator got postponed indefinitely. Tuesday morning, Sal tried calling his contacts uptown. Numbers he'd been using for months. None of them answered. Tuesday afternoon, Frank Costello got a message through an intermediary. Not from Bumpy directly. Just a quiet word passed through channels. The message was simple. Harlem's not interested in supervision. By Tuesday night, Sal Vitale was back in Brooklyn, reassigned, demoted. The guys on his crew wouldn't even look at him. He hadn't been shot, hadn't been beaten, hadn't been arrested. He'd been ignored. And in the underworld, being ignored is worse than being killed. Because when you're dead, people remember you. When you're ignored, you never existed in the first place. Bumpy Johnson could have responded a dozen different ways that night. He could have had Sal thrown out, could have embarrassed him publicly, could have had his people follow Sal back to Brooklyn and teach him a lesson in an alley. But Bumpy didn't do any of that. When Sal sat down uninvited, when he took food off Bumpy's plate, when he talked about Harlem needing supervision, he was testing Bumpy, trying to see if the legend matched reality. Bumpy's response wasn't about Sal Vitale. It was about everyone else in that room. The numbers bankers who did business on the border between Harlem and Brooklyn. The politicians who took money from both sides. The operators who were thinking maybe the Italians had a point. That 10 seconds of silence told all of them what happens when you disrespect Harlem. Not violence, not drama, just silence and consequences. By saying nothing, Bumpy forced everyone in that room to choose a side, and every single person chose Harlem. Within a week, the story had spread through every borough. Not the version Sal told. Sal didn't tell anyone what happened. He couldn't. No, the story came from the people who were there. The numbers bankers, the jazz club owner, the city council aide, even the off-duty cop, who told his partner about watching Bumpy Johnson dismantle a made man with 5 words. The 5 families got the message. Within 2 weeks, there was an internal directive passed through the organization. Not official, nothing written down, just word of mouth through capos and soldiers. The directive was simple. No unsanctioned business in Harlem. You want to operate uptown, you go through proper channels. You ask permission. You show respect. Or you end up like Sal Vitale. It was the first time the Italian mob had ever formally backed down from a territory without a war. Not because they couldn't win a fight. They had the manpower. They had the money. They had the political connections. They backed down because they realized something. You can't fight a man who's always 3 moves ahead. Bumpy Johnson lived another 12 years after that night at Wells Supper Club. He died in 1968, not from a bullet, but from a heart attack. Ironically, at another restaurant in Harlem, surrounded by the same kind of people who'd been in Wells that night. But the story of what happened on March 3rd, 1956, that story never died. People in Harlem still tell it, not as a ghost story or legend, as a lesson. Sal Vitale learned that the hard way. He spent the rest of his career as a low-level collector in Brooklyn, never got his button, never moved up. Guys in the organization would see him and remember, that's the guy who got embarrassed by Bumpy Johnson. And Bumpy? He went back to his corner table at Wells Supper Club the next Saturday night. Same seat, same meal, same fork, set down slowly when necessary. Same quiet authority. Because that's the thing about real power. It doesn't need to prove itself. Years later, when new operators asked about doing business uptown, the old-timers would tell them, "You go to Harlem, you remember Wells." They never explained what happened there. Didn't need to. The smart ones figured it out. The dumb ones learned the hard way. By 1960, Sal Vitale was running a newsstand in Bensonhurst. No crew, no respect. Just a man selling papers who once thought he could sit at Bumpy Johnson's table. And Bumpy? Every Saturday night, same corner table at Wells. Same fork, set down the same way when necessary. Because some men prove their power once, and then they never have to prove it again.